By 1953, it was almost certain that a Labour victory was inevitable. The economy continued to stagnate, and people began to become weary of the 6-year-old Liberal Country Coalition government under Robert Menzies. So what could go wrong for Labour? Well, pretty much everything. As talked about in the previous election, the Senate and the House calendars had fallen out of sync, and thus an immediate election was required to follow up the 1954 election. The coalition would yet again be fighting against the odds to win a fourth term in office, and this time there was no Petrov affair to sour the public's opinion of the Labour Party. By 1954, the investigations into the Australian-based Soviet spy ring had come to a close. While some communist sympathisers, mostly within the Australian Communist Party, had been partaking in minor acts of espionage for the Soviet Union, no major spy ring was discovered, and nobody was ever charged. Despite the Royal Commission being a failure, the repercussions of the investigation would have dramatic effects in Parliament. After the 1954 election, H.V. Evatt remained the leader of the Labour Party, and was furious at his party's performance in the previous election. He continued to push the narrative that Menzies had conspired with ASIO to use the Petrov affair to sway public opinion away from the Labour Party. Hoping to put any rumours of Soviet spy ring to rest, Evatt would directly contact Soviet Foreign Minister, I'm not going to pronounce that, Molotov, to inquire if there was any secret spy ring. Upon getting a denial of a spy ring, Evatt presented Molotov's statement to Parliament, where he got the following reply.
Are you serious?
This major political graph left Evatt even more infuriated, and he began to lash out at members of his own party. He took particular aim at the so-called Groupers, a religious anti-communist movement. In the late 40s, the Labour Party had set up the Industrial Groups, a series of organisations designed to stop infiltrations of unions by communists. By 1955, these industrial groups had become infested by the Social Studies movement, a right-wing contingent of strong anti-communists led by a devout Catholic Bartholomew Augustine Santa Maria. These members of the industrial groups became known as groupers, and would oppose not only communism, but any element of the Labour Party not deemed anti-communist enough. Evatt accused groupers of trying to undermine him using their strong influence within the Labour Party, particularly in the Victorian branch of the Labour Party, currently led by three-time Premier John Cain. Evatt, with the help of his supporters in Cain's government, would attempt to wrestle Santa Maria's influence away from the state parliament, and in early 1955, the Federal Labour Executive dissolved the Victorian State Executive and appointed a new state executive in its place. This move only had the effect of creating two state executives, with those in Parliament who were pro-Santa Maria acknowledging the old executive as legitimate, and the pro-Evatt supporters acknowledging the new state executive instead. This split would eventually lead to the total expulsion of all 24 pro-Santa Maria members in the Victorian State Labour government. These expelled members would then join forces with the state Liberal opposition under Henry Bolt to push a no-confidence movement in Cain's government, where it would be crushed in the 1955 state election, where Labour would remain in opposition until 1982, when Labour would finally win under Cain's son, John Cain Jr. Getting back to federal politics, the implications of the Victorian state Labour government's split would see the expelled members form their own federal party, called the Labour Party Anti-Communist, not to be confused with the non-communist Labour Party from the 1940s. This new party would also gain the support of several Victorian-based unions, who were supportive of the groupers movement. One figure who strangely did not join the new party was Santa Maria himself, who chose to remain unaffiliated with any political party. He would, however, hold a large amount of influence over the new anti-communist party. Back in Canberra, Menzies was quick to capitalise on the fracturing Labour Party, and was all too happy to call an election for the 10th of December 1955. His confidence came from the anti-communists encouraging their voters to preference the coalition ahead of the Labour Party. Santa Maria had made it very clear that he intended to keep Labour from winning government until they had abandoned all support for any communist ideals. This election would also see an additional seat added to Parliament, bringing the total up to 122. Glad to know they didn't wait 50 years this time. And the winner was Robert Menzies and the coalition with 64 seats, a gain of 11, which would also be seen in a 4.9% gain in the two-party preferred. Thus, Robert Menzies became the first Prime Minister in Australian history to win 4 elections in a row, a record only 2 other Prime Ministers hold. Evatt and the Labour Party had lost 10 seats to now hold 47, washing away all their gains since 1949. While the anti-communists had not picked up any seats in the lower house, they had gained 2 seats in the Senate and won 6.1% of the first preferences, ensuring they would hold the balance of power for the foreseeable future. Fun fact, despite the heavy amount of anti-communist rhetoric dominating this election, the Australian Communist Party would reach its peak support in this election at 3.64% of the first preference votes in the Senate. However, this would not be enough to get a senator elected, and the Federal Party would begin to decline in popularity until its eventual dissolution in 1991. This election had been a disaster for Labour. Catholics had always been one of Labour's most reliable voting blocs, and with large numbers of them voting for the new Labour Party anti-communist, the party's voting base was decimated. Evatt himself had almost lost his seat of Barton, when over 3/4 of independent voters' preferences went to his Liberal opponent. Unfortunately, things for Labour were only going to get worse as other state Labour branches began to fracture, with members flocking to join the new party. Come back next time for the election of 1958.